What's going on, everyone? So today I have a Tarkin red list, which, well, is a little bit similar to the Palp red in terms of colors and potentially, villainy red green type strategy, but it is far and away very different when it comes to playstyle and what your goal of the deck is trying to do. It is much more aggro oriented, trooper focused, and getting value out of Tarkin's leader ability. So let's dive into it. And for those of you that are interested in more deck text, more videos from yours truly, well, be sure to subscribe because we are very close to 1,000 subscribers as of, well, this video being posted. So thanks for getting me there and thanks for watching. So we have the leader ability in the top left as per usual. We got to talk about Grand Moff Tarkin. Now, I made a video on Grand Moff Tarkin before. It was a mono green list, mainly focused on the, many sources of ramp that we could be running into bigger things. This one, or this list, I should say, is way more focused on the action and the ability to leverage the really powerful troopers and just stats that we can get from this action and being aggressive about putting power on the battlefield and then attacking our opponents. So we have things that a lot of 2-drops that are really good at just being played and then getting buffed up, or even things that are like super laser, as you can see, that are leveraging the fact that we do have an additional resource to get all those additional experience tokens out on the battlefield. There are many games where I've had a TIE fighter, and assuming you don't have the waylays out there, that has like 6 or 7 power against those aggro decks that didn't immediately trade with it, and then they just don't want to trade with it because it just trades up on everything because of how many experience tokens it has, or maybe they just didn't have a way to deal with it because they didn't have a space unit that game. So really powerful stuff. And then the body side of Tarkin's actually extremely relevant because this is a 2/7 that comes down on turn 5. So if you compare it to things like, Leia or Sabine, which is a little bit earlier, a little bit more aggro focused, right? Leia's a 3/6. It gets you the ability to attack and such, but this is essentially like a 3/7, but the power go, or 3/8, but the power and toughness go on another unit, which can be even better than having it all on Tarkin. This guy's going to survive oftentimes, and he's gonna probably get in for a couple hits, and then he's kind of annoying to kill off because, well, yeah, he's a 2/7, which means that you have to hit him with probably multiple units, and well, the 2 toughness isn't irrelevant. So very strong, just gives you extra power and toughness on the battlefield every single turn. And lastly, we are using Tarkin Town because we do have a lot of small creatures that we can just ping off enemy units if they decide to trade in and try to kill off some of our units. This is just a very powerful additional removal spell, and because we are more aggressive, we don't necessarily care about the 5 HP loss with something like Kestro City, which we could use instead. So pretty interesting, but we don't talk about the main appeal of the deck, which is the Trooper Ground Squad. So as you can see here, we have a lot of ground units and a lot of units in general, starting us off with 3 copies of Death Star Stormtrooper. This is the ideal turn 1 play. And if they don't immediately kill it, which they can, it's definitely possible they just immediately kill it. But there are also times where like they are forced to kill it because you'll go Death Star Stormtrooper, give it an experience token, and now it's a 4/2. And it's attacking for 4 power or 4 damage on turn 2, which is kind of ridiculous. So they really need to either kill this immediately, and if they don't have a way to kill it, or maybe they played a space unit, that's the ideal scenario where they go like A-Wing, and you go Death Star Stormtrooper, and they were going to take initiative anyways because they made the first play, and then you get to go to put an experience token. Now you're hitting for 4, and they're hitting for 3, but you could potentially trade in with their 2-drop. That might be a 3/4 or something like that, which is really nice. 3 copies of General Tog. This is not a turn 1 play. This is oftentimes a turn 3 or turn 4 play. And you don't want to like look at this as, oh, I need to have 3 troopers to deploy this. I've deployed this when you have 1 or 2 troopers. But of course, the best play is to get it out when you can deploy multiple troopers in a turn and then get all that spirits tokens. This can be really good, but there are a lot of times where you just resource it as you only have 1 threat at any given time or 2 threats at any given time. And maybe they're not a trooper, as we do have all troopers in the deck, but most of them are. 3 copies of Snow Trooper Lieutenant. This is just a really powerful kind of build your own fleet lieutenant with the experience tokens, as if you go turn 1 Death Star Stormtrooper, experience token, turn 2 Snow Trooper Lieutenant, you get to attack for 6 on turn 2, And you can give the Snowtrooper Lieutenant experience token, or, and this is really important, you do not have to give it to the unit you played that turn like Luke. You can give it to any Imperial unit. So you can just give it to the Death Star Stormtrooper, and suddenly it's a 5/3. Or you could, again, build your own Fleet Lieutenant. We have 3 copies of First Legion Snowtrooper and 3 copies of Seasoned Shoretrooper. Same body, 2/3, same tags. The difference is the First Legion Snowtrooper is particularly good against, things that might have wanted to trade in with your earlier units and maybe have lived because, well, killing off a unit and getting in for overwhelm damage is really impressive, but it's also just a 2/3 trooper that, again, on turn 2, you can play this as a 2/3 and then give it another experience counter, which makes it a 3/4, which can be really nice. Same thing applies with Seasoned Shore Trooper, and Seasoned Shore Trooper in particular, if you do start buffing it up, you play it on turn 2, turn 3, or whatever, and you make it a 3/4, it suddenly becomes a 5/4 very quickly thereafter, which can be really powerful. 3 copies of Super Laser Technician. Now, this might be a little bit strange. Like, why are we playing Super Laser Technician in a deck that wants to be very aggressive? Well, again, we can leverage the additional action from Tarkin with an additional resource. And on top of that, this is a guaranteed trade no matter what they're playing with Tarkin Town, right? With Tarkin Town and Super Laser Tech, you are guaranteed to use this as essentially a removal spell that gives you an additional resource. And that means that, let's say you go turn to Super Laser Tech after you play your 4/2 Stormtrooper and you try to attack their unit and then you Tarkin Town it. And then you can then follow that up with, or turn 3, you attack them with Super Laser Tech and then you Tarkin Town something. You can immediately deploy Tarkin, which is really powerful. And then you could follow up Tarkin with things like, maybe Shore Trooper, Snow Trooper plus action, or you can do Snow Trooper, action, Shore Trooper, Tarkin, and then you have potentially a 4/5 Snow Trooper or 2/3/4 Shore Trooper and Snow Trooper because of the experience tokens he's passing around. And then you get the 6 resources the following turn with Shore Trooper. It's just very powerful. 3 copies of General Veers. It's 3/3, which is really solid, but also gives every unit in the entire deck, with the exception of a single card, 1 copy, +1/+1, which is really powerful. 3 copies of Cell Block Guard. This is just a trooper that's going to give you a lot of sentinel value, especially in the aggro matchup. 2 copies of Fifth Brother. This one's just really good as a unit to put experience tokens on, as well. It doesn't need to be a trooper, but it's just an Imperial unit. If you get an experience token on this and it's a 3/5, suddenly it's attacking for essentially 4 damage on a unit if you want it to, or rather 5 damage on a unit if you want it to. And if you just put experience tokens on this, it gets really big really quickly and really, really nasty. Because essentially, if you're attacking base, every experience token that you put on this unit, you get 2 damage out of it, which is really nice. Lastly, we have 2 copies of Darth Vader. And I've seen some people talk about aggro lists and things like, why are we playing more expensive cards in aggro lists like, Darth Vader or Gorilla Attack Pod? You have to remember that the opportunity cost in this game in particular about running more expensive units is basically 0 because you could just resource this early. So if you have a Darth Vader early on, just resource it. There's no reason not to. And when you do get the games where they're a little bit longer, or maybe you have a little bit more grindy, and you deploy a Darth Vader and you get to deploy something like a Veers, or you get to deploy, a Snow Trooper Lieutenant, so you're attacking for 1,000,000. This is just a really nice way, especially against the Boba matchup, where you could just deploy a Darth Vader after they take their massive Boba turn, and they do something crazy. Especially if you have a Super Laser Tech, you get to turn one this, play this a turn 1 earlier. You get to just do some amazing stuff. Darth Vader, on the other hand, is the most expensive card in the deck by far. This is actually a pretty budget-friendly list. Like, there isn't anything in here that's actually super expensive. This is one of the most budget-friendly lists that you could play. And so if you want to keep it as a budget-friendly list, you can remove the Darth Vaders and instead play like 97th Legion if you want another 7-drop. But instead of just playing any 7-drops, I would just play a little bit cheaper, cards, potentially something like, you can even play Steadfast Battalion, because it's a trooper. Although I would probably just finish off the play sets of Consortium Star Viper or Fifth Brother, maybe like 3 Fifth Brother, 2 Star Vipers, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So something to consider, because if you take out Darth Vader, well, you take about like 95% of the deck's cost, as per usual. That's the ground unit selection. Let's talk about space. So our space options are pretty sweet, as all of them are honestly just really high value plays, even the turn one in TIE Fighter. So 3 copies of TIE Fighter. Main reason for this is that it's a 3/2 for 1 resource, and it trades with everything. So oftentimes if you are on the draw, or if you do not have the initiative in the aggro mirror, and let's say you're playing Sabine against Sabine and they go A-Wing, and your turn one play, the only one you have is an A-Wing, that is a nightmare for you because they just trade into it. But this is one of the few space units that has 3 power and 2 toughness. And in fact, I don't know of any turn one play in the aggro decks that is going to be able to match this on the defense. So this just gives you a really nice beater. If you just attack your opponent, that's fine. But if they want to trade in with your space, you can at least trade with it. 1 copy of Consortium Star Viper. I wanted another space unit in here, as we do want to make sure that we have that kind of under control in a lot of situations. But it's also just a 3/3 and has Restore 2. This is the only unit in the entire deck that cannot be used with Tarkin's ability, which is why I wanted to keep it a little bit lighter, but it's also just really good against the aggro matchups. 3 copies of TIE Advance. This is kind of like your wing leader, right? 2 experience tokens and a 3/2 body instead of a 2/1, but it costs 1 more. This is just really good on basically any of our units, right? Putting on Snow Trooper or Shore Trooper or Cell Block Guard or Fifth Brother is a really nice one. Just really powerful. 3 copies of Imperial Interceptor. This helps us control the space extremely well. It basically deals with any space unit either equally, as it trades into the things like 7th Fleet Defender pretty evenly, or even kills things like Fett's Fire Spray. It trades in with that. Or it just kills off an early game unit for free. They play red 3, you go Imperial Interceptor the following turn. That is a nightmare play for your opponents to see, and it is really good. Lastly, we have 2 copies or 3 copies of Ruthless Raider. This is a nice finisher in the deck. This is kind of like your K2SO. If they don't kill it, you're just attacking for 4 in space, which is really hard to deal with. And even if they do, you've already gotten 2 damage into the base and 2 damage to an enemy unit. And then you could follow it up with another 2 damage to the enemy base and another 2 damage to an enemy unit. So really powerful, can be a removal spell sometimes, but most often just acts as a little bit of a burn spell, which with also being a nice space unit. And if you grow it, right, it could be a 5/7, 6/7, things, or 6/8, things like that, which is really nice. Let's talk about the few events that we have and then the sideboard. So one of the nice things about playing the Tarkin Red deck is that basically every single one of our ground units is a trooper in the earlier turns, right? We have Death Star, Stormtrooper, Snow Trooper, Lieutenant, First Legion, Snow Trooper, Shore Trooper, Cell Block Guard, right? All of which benefit from precision fire. So I've really enjoyed this card in the deck. Again, if you draw too many of them or you don't draw the right units, you could just resource it, which is totally fine. And you don't even need it to be a trooper to be effective. There are some situations where you just need to have Saboteur, but this is kind of like a surprise strike, right? You could just get in for some extra damage for 1 mana. And if they do play something like Crafty Smuggler, now you could just kill their unit for free with, you know, your First Legion Snow Trooper, right? You defeat the shield, which is quite nice. 3 copies of Force Choke. We don't have any Force synergies really in this deck, right? We have Fifth Brother and Darth Vader, and that's it. But you just play this as a 2 resource removal spell. And this is really good, especially against something like Boba Fett itself, as you could just kill it. And this is one of the big things that keeps us kind of on parity with some of the Boba decks in some situations, because they do a really not a high number on our experience growing, creatures, since they have things like Waylay and such. 3 copies of Overwhelming Barrage. If you're in green, you're in villainy, you're playing 3 copies of this card for the most part, and wow, is this card really good. It's basically like a Steadfast Battalion, essentially pumping your units, right? Except instead of like ECLing and having to kill a unit, you get to Overwhelming Barrage one of your, let's say you have a Cell Block Guard, right? That's 5 damage that you get to distribute, which is basically like a one-sided board wipe, and you get to attack for 5 afterwards, which is really nice. Overwhelming Barrage has a ton of targets in this deck, and you really don't want to sit on this card. Like if you go turn 1 Stormtrooper, turn 2 Snow Trooper, get an experience counter, turn 3 TIE Advance, something like that, and let's say they traded off with a couple of your units and you just have the TIE Advance left over, right? And you're in a situation where, okay, do I play Overwhelming Barrage to kill off their 1 unit? Absolutely you do. Because the way this works is you can immediately deploy Tarkin on the same turn you can Overwhelming Barrage. You're always going to have a target that's going to deal 4 damage at the minimum for the most part. And you're going to be able to get in for some damage. And if you clear the board and you can start building up experience tokens, let's say you go Overwhelming Barrage, tie advance, and you get to kill off their like red 3 and do 2 damage to something else, or maybe you kill off or do 5 damage to Leia, and then you finish it off with Tarkin. Now you can start putting experience tokens on your other units, which help generate more advantage. So you really want to keep the board as clear as possible. If you can, of course, you don't have to. You can just get in for some extra points of damage, as we are an aggro deck, but that's where Force Choke and Overwhelming Barrage come in handy. Let's talk about the sideboard now. So for our sideboard here, we're going to start off with 2 copies of Wolf. This is particularly good against Iden, Krennic, healing type decks. If they're playing Vigilance in the main deck, this is really powerful. Keep in mind that this card should not just always be played on turn 1 as well. It's just a 3-2 essentially on turn 1. It can get some incident of value, but you might want to consider, and this is really important, playing this on key turns. Turn 5 is really important for Iden and Krennic. It's also really important on turn 3 potentially for Iden and Krennic if they're playing mono blue. And the reason for that is Vigilance comes down on turn 3. Cargo Juggernaut comes down on turn 5, which heals 4. Both of those are kind of game changers for them. And so if you get to Wolf before they get to deploy their Cargo Juggernaut, you essentially remove that massive game swinging impact that card has to some degree, at least, right? They still have a decent body with a shield, right? But at least they don't get to heal as well. 3 copies of Colonel Yularen. This is really nice in the aggro mirror, as well. We don't have a ton of green cards, right? But even just playing like Yularen on his own as a 2/3 and then giving him experience tokens, this is a unit that they kind of have to kill. And again, aggro decks aren't really that great at killing off big units. And so if you just keep giving this experience tokens, like, okay, turn 2, Colonel Yularen, experience token, heal 1. Now it's a 3/4. Now they have to kill it, or they're just going to be healing 1-2 points of damage, and it's going to help you race, or you can just grow it really big and they can't even deal with it. 1 copy of Emperor Palpatine. This gives us a little bit more game in some of the longer matchups. Again, just dealing a ton of damage and gives us a nice 6/6 body. It is 8 resource, so this one comes in rarely, but it can be nice against the controlling matchups for when the games do last that long, or even in some cases the Boba matchups where they're trying to waylay stuff and they're bouncing things and they're getting stuff out of the way, and then you're trading in units and it ends up being a longer game. But you get past their major Boba turn, and then you can deploy Emperor Palpatine and wipe the board essentially. 2 copies of Open Fire gets rid of some of the early game threats and just deals with some of the early pressure. If you have that sort of thing happening, like things like Sabine, it just kills. Things like Echo Base Defender just kills. And of course, it just clears the way for your early units. And lastly, we have 2 copies of Traitorous. Again, this is a really nice card specifically against Boba Fett, the unit. I've said this many times, but if they're able to start their Boba things where they go Asteroid Sanctuary, put a shield token on my Boba Fett, attack your exhausted unit, deal 3 damage to the unit and kill it for free, that could be really disastrous. So if they go do something like that, Traitorous can help you kind of return the value back in your favor. But also, it's just good against some of the more aggro slash tempo oriented matchups. Things like Grand Inquisitor also is really good against. For the most part, though, this deck's already pretty good against the more controlling decks because you just get so much value, right? Unless they're like killing off your units specifically, right? You could actually just outgrow things like Takedown. And you can outgrow their bigger units because of Tarkin. And so that is something that they have to keep in mind. And unless they're just actually defeating it with Power of the Dark Side or takedowns, then you could just outgrow them. And that means that you get a lot of value and you don't really need to worry too much about the more long game matchups, especially since we are running those 2 copies of Darth Vader and 3 copies of Ruthless Raider. But the tempo oriented games and the more aggressive games, this is where, we do have a decent game, but siding in things like Yularen and Traitorous and Open Fire puts that far away in our advantage. So that's going to be Tarkin Red. Trooper Beatdown. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you all are enjoying Star Wars Unlimited. I know I have been very much so over the past couple of months. I will be putting out a video soon on like my top 3 favorite budget decks, and this is definitely going to be one of them, except I'm going to be taking out Darth Vader, as this is the most friendly while also being an extremely powerful budget friendly list that I found in terms of aggro, because if you're playing Sabine or Leia, you don't get to play with red 3s and K2s and for a causes, which are some of the most powerful cards in the deck. Whereas this one, Darth Vader is powerful for sure, but there are some games where you don't even need him because you can just resource him and then beat down. So kind of interesting to see that. But let me know what you think, and I'll see you all for the next one.